In the name of the Holy and Undivided Trinity, one God. Amen. Please be seated. Once upon a time, there was a man who was taking a journey. Just a man on a road, going from one place to another, living his life, taking care of his daily to-do list like you do. On the surface, that's all there is to this incredible story we heard from the book of Acts this morning. But beneath the simple facade, the man on the road, are worlds of possibilities. And it turns out that neither the man nor the road are what they appear to be at first glance. The man is Saul, later known as Paul, a high-ranking Pharisee, a religious leader who had made it his mission in life to preserve the integrity of his faith and to defend it from dangerous heretical dissidents. So Saul, reading threats against the disciples of the Lord, wanted to pursue these dissident Christians, to round them up and return them bound to Jerusalem. And so off he went, from Jerusalem to Damascus, full of righteous zeal, on fire with purpose. Saul thought he was pursuing Christians. Instead, he was being pursued by Christ. A road of threat and danger becomes a holy meeting place of grace and reconciliation, and Saul becomes a man transformed. Saul had planned to enter Damascus from a position of power, ready to arrest and imprison, to subdue others, and to do violence in the name of God. Instead, he enters in a state of total helplessness, blind, dependent on his traveling companions to literally take him by the hand and lead him where he needs to go. This is not the entry he envisioned. And then, adding insult to injury, he becomes even further dependent, this time on a total stranger, and a Christian, no less. A man named Ananias, one of the very people Saul had intended to arrest, turns out to hold the keys to his healing. The post-resurrection world is not what it appears to be on the surface. The theologian and biblical scholar Willie James Jennings speaks powerfully about how the transforming power of the resurrection shows up in the story. And he says, God disrupts the old order of the world by interrupting individual lives. In other words, God deals in specifics. To change the world, God doesn't sit up in the clouds and issue sweeping edicts from on high and then stand back and see if they work. No, God pursues us individually, just as God pursued Saul on the road to Damascus. If the story of Jesus Christ teaches us anything, it is to never, ever underestimate the power that one life lived in faith and love and service can have upon the course of history. By transforming individual lives, God transforms the world. And the story of the conversion of Saul is a powerful reminder of how deeply and intimately God knows each of us, knows what we are capable of even when we don't. It is never too late for us to begin anew, to accept the invitation of grace and start over. God always sees our potential, and as disciples of the risen Christ, we are invited to see the world through God's eyes as well. Jennings wonders poetically, can we see those who are in rumor or in truth dangerous as God sees them, with the future drenched in divine desire? Can we see past the limits of our human imaginations, of our fear, of our biases, and dare to dream with God and see the divinely drenched potential of our world and of its future? Because Saul is not the only one whose sight is transformed in this story. Ananias also undergoes a divine transformation. At first, he sees in Saul exactly what you would expect. A dangerous enemy, a threat best avoided. No surprise. But in order for this resurrection transformation that God has in mind to take place, Ananias has to learn to see Saul as God does, has to learn to see Saul's potential and to see past the blinders of his fear, even though that fear is justified. Ananias has to take a leap of faith. So do we. The true miracle of this story is not that Paul's sight was magically restored. It's that Ananias takes the leap of faith, is able to see past his fear, to repay violence and hatred with love and healing. That is the miracle. And that, friends, is the power of the resurrection. By the light of the risen Christ, we also are able to see one another's potential, drenched in divine desire. And we are able to see by the light of that grace that we are all bound to each other, intimately, messily, and utterly inconveniently. Resurrection is not an individual or isolated affair. It is a cascade effect, a fuse that lights the world on fire as the flames of that resurrection hope set heart after heart ablaze until the whole world is lit up. We are the bearers of that flame, guarding that light, passing it to one another when our own lights flicker and falter. There are no two ways about it. A transformation of the magnitude that we hear about today requires tremendous courage, and it necessitates extraordinary vulnerability. The power of the risen Christ is not to be trifled with. It lays us bare. It brings us to our knees, as it should. A less powerful God would not be worthy of our time or our trust. The resurrection does not simply pass us by and leave us alone or unchanged. It changes the very foundation of our souls. It reroots our lives. And if you believe today's story, it even changes our name. The transformation goes deep. So what would become possible if we could see the world as God does, drenched in divine potential and desire? What would be possible if we let God touch us, let the scales fall from our eyes, and learn to see past the limits of our biases and suspicions? Through Paul's conversion, the early church was transformed in ways no one could have ever imagined. Through one life changed by Christ, everything changed. And Paul unleashed a cascade of grace on the first century world that blew everyone away. His faith, the faith of one person, was a spark that lit a bonfire. And that fire still burns today in our hearts in this place. What unexpected transformation might be in store for us? What potential that we never dared to imagine lies in wait for our divinely sparked hearts? This Eastertide, may God so interrupt our lives that we, transformed by the risen one, come to see the world as drenched in divine potential and ripe for transformation.